Not yet.
Something hanging down under her dress here.
Well, I can't really see that on the other camera.
Oh, okay. You're doing good, Ma.
Well, let's start with the name, your name and the year you were born, and where you were born on Beaver Island.
I was born where Wojan's Motel is, up there in the house.
Okay, and that was your parents' house at the time?
Yeah, no, they rented it.
Okay.
And my dad kept,
What was his name?
what is it, saloon or what? He was a bartender,
Okay, and your dad's name was?
Dan P. Boyle, Dan Patrick Boyle. My mother's name was Margaret, or Maggie Gallagher first, and then Boyle. And
Your birthday.
1907, March the 11th.
And how many were there in your family?
Mary, and we adopted Jack. And so then there was three of us, Jack and
Your little sister.
Mary and I. And one little sister died when she was 11 months old. Many babies died that year on the island. They had a loss of water. What do you call that?
Dehydration.
Dehydrated. That was named Jewel. And see, we had an Aunt Jewel, Julia. So anyway, she's buried up here in the cemetery. She has a little stone with a lamb on it. And so then we moved up to a Mormon house that belonged to a Gallagher, Francie Gallagher, that eventually came over here.
Mm-hmm.
He had a taxi. And so we had a house, my dad had the house all fixed up, replastered and floors put in and so on. But he went up to he ran camp. He was in charge of the camp, and he hired men, and
that was for the Beaver Island Lumber Company?
yes,
Yeah.
the train was there then,
Do you remember which camp he worked at?
Camp 5.
Camp number 5.
There was other camps up there, and well then we stayed up at my grandmother Boyle's. Bridget Boyle was her name, and her husband had died before that. And while my dad was up in camp, we were at my grandmother's, Mom, and that would be in that house now that was a
Bed and breakfast. The bed and breakfast.
bread and breakfast.
On Sloptown Road,
Mm-hmm.
Harlem's place.
Harlem's. And where was the Mormon house that you had lived in? Where was that located?
That was up about 2 blocks from Grandma's house.
On Sloptown.
Uh-huh.
That would be.
It was a big farm
On that corner.
on the Darkytown corner.
Okay.
And we stayed there, Mom and us children, you know, while my dad was up in camp. And he'd come home and he had to go to town and shop. they'd get everything in boxes, you know, big box, of course. And he had good cooks. And he always wanted them to have pancakes in the morning. He didn't want to put a man out working without pancakes. And so then sometimes we'd be up in camp. And one time I got sick, and he had to go downtown, he and some other man, to get some castor oil, or castoria or something. And he said it was so dark, you had to get out every so often and see if you're on the road, feel I was a nuisance. But anyway, and so then we started a school.
In which school would you have gone
That'd
to?
be in Sunnyside.
All right, that would be on Kings Highway.
And it's 2.5 miles. Isn't that what Richie?
I think so.
Uh-huh. I thought it was longer. And we walked there in the summertime all the time. Walked to school and walked back. We'd always be the first ones there. That's the way it is. Then those that are close to school, they're usually late.
Yeah.
But anyway, so then,
Who were your some of your teachers at that time at Sunnyside?
Veritas, sister, all nuns. There was two rooms in the school. The four grades were in one, and the others in the other one. That worked out all right, though. We got a good education because the 4 in my class got the highest in the county.
Really?
It was in the paper. And I was Victorian when we, left the 8th grade. And then, then I went downtown, and I stayed with Aunt Pidgey, they called her. I must send her picture over to the thing over there. And Aunt Marianne, and I stayed at Quinlan's a while. That was, and
Quinlan's would have been the house near the point, is that right?
and so then I met James, of course, in high school.
Back up
Huh?
and tell about Quinlan.
What do you remember of him? He was a Coast Guard.
Yes, he had a lot of stripes on his arm.
Yeah.
He was in there a long time.
Tell who he was.
And see, Mama was married in Chicago, and she had Quinlan. And then her husband died, and she came back to the island, and she had a boarding house, and she met my dad and married him.
I see.
So that's then where we came in. And
Can we go back just a little bit? You talking about your dad running one of the lumber camps. So you were growing up at the time when the train was still running there on the island.
mm-hmm.
Do you remember ever using it or traveling on it?
No.
But the older women at that time did? They
I
would
don't
take it
know about that.
to pick berries. I've heard that they would take the train down.
See, we could see the train from our house.
Yeah.
That'd be up where, the track, where the track is.
Up by Dr. Protar's.
And
There must have been a lot of activity on the road you were living on, Sloptown,
Yes.
with the farms and with the
There was.
lumbering, and the town itself must have been
the
very busy.
McCaffertys lived down, half a mile or so. And they had a big family. We all walked to school together. All got along, all carried our lunches.
Who were some of your other neighbors on Sloptown Road at that time?
Well, at that time, of course, my grandmother and Uncle Huey lived with her. That was her son. And then he got married and had 2 sons. So they were on there. And then Tyke Glaspie lived there. And the Moonies.
Yeah.
And then down farther, the Caffertys. All those places are gone now.
How did Tyke get that nickname?
I don't know.
And
Maybe
your
he was tight, I don't know.
and your father was called Turner.
Mm-hmm.
How did he get that nickname?
They said he'd holler when they were on the square dance. He'd holler, "Turn her!" You know, when somebody else would be calling out. That's what I heard of anyway.
See.
And when I was born, they named me Margaret, Bridget Margaret. And my mother didn't like Bridget, so she started calling me Patricia. So Mary started calling me Theresa. So that's the way I got Theresa.
Mm-hmm.
And so then a few years back, when I was going to get Social Security, I wanted to change the way it was recorded. So Mary came and Bert came from Chicago. They were there all winter. And we went down to the courthouse, and they dropped the Bridget, and I kept the Margaret. And I kept the Theresa because all my life I was Theresa. Theresa Margaret Gallagher now. And what else do you want to know?
Well, what was life like on the farm that you lived at Sloptown in those years?
Well,
Tell about the horse.
the what?
The horse that would follow, go and get him and bring him home and go to the barn and open up the door.
Oh, yeah, we had a lot of cattle, of course. And they'd leave the cattle out to run up through the woods in the summertime. And then the cattle would come out, some of them would come home themselves, and others you had to go out and look for them. The men would go out and look for them. And we had one that Jack named her, I don't know now what name that was. But anyway, she came, we lived in from the road. And she came in that runway or driveway or whatever it was, bawling and looking at the house like if she was just talking to us. It's great to see what animals know. And my dad would go down to that Tight's house because they were all bachelors down there, and the men met there every evening nearly. And when he'd be coming home, he had one black horse, Chester was his name, and that horse would meet him down about a block from our place and walk behind him and come up home. And then when they'd get to the barnyard, the horse would go over and there was a bolt on the door. He'd open the door and go into a stall, just like you'd want him to, you know. He thought a lot of his horses. He'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and feed them, you know, because he'd be going to work maybe at 7. He worked on the road a lot. And that worked out fine.
Did your parents speak any Gaelic?
Did they what?
Did they speak Gaelic at all? Your mother?
Oh, my mother did with her old aunts. She could pray in Gaelic. And the aunt was dying and she was with her, you know. She lived over the trail. And so that, you know, that just
But
made her feel
yeah,
good.
several of your people of your parents' generation probably spoke Gaelic when you were
Mhm.
a child.
And one one of our family came over to this country, and when they left Ireland, they composed a song. I have the song. And of course, you know, they don't like to leave the island.
Which ancestor would have written that song, do you remember?
She came to the island and married a Gallagher, and her name was, what was it? What's her name? Catherine Gallagher. She ended up, you know, after she was married. I think that was it. I'm gonna make a copy of that song and send it over to the. Somebody told me to do that.
Yeah, that'd be valuable to have.
It's nice.
So after you left the farm on Sloptown, you moved back into the town, in the village, at the harbor. And what year would have that have been roughly? It would have been 1915 or 16 when you moved back to town?
Well, I went to school and, when did I go to school?
At Sunnyside. How about working at the priest's house? When did you do that?
At the what?
At the priest, the house.
Oh, that was later.
When you lived at Quinlan's, near the point, what years would that have been?
I think that was maybe 19, you know, 1919. And then that was a long ways to walk, clear around the bay. So I moved over. And, well, I went to school and I met James, of course, in high school, and I was at Aunt Mary Ann's then. That was right, you know, the house that just tore down. And so he'd come in there. We were classmates, too. And then Grace was in the class, too, and Lily and Andy. But he'd come in the evening, and he'd say, somebody down the street wants to meet you. So silly me, I'd go with him, you know. We'd walk down the street, we'd walk back, and that was it. I never met anybody. See, it was him that wanted to spend the time with me. So that was his way of getting acquainted with me, I guess.
Courting days.
Yeah. And then, before I left Sunnyside School, that year, I took violin lessons. And I got so that I could play the violin in the choir and up on the stage. And Aunt Sophia one time, Nels got her a diamond. So it was new, and she put the diamond on me when I was going to play on the stage because she said they'll see the sparkle. But anyway, that's just... But then what?
You were married in
33
33.
in Chicago. My family couldn't afford to put on. Mary had everybody on the island. Well, then we had a big bill afterwards to pay, you know. And I didn't want to do that to them because my dad was older then and, you know, not working so much. And so some of my relatives came along one time, and I was working at the church, at the rectory, keeping house for a priest. And
Went to Chicago with my relative.
and he came in and said, all you did was work all your life, which I did. I had worked different places. And he said, you better come to Chicago and have a vacation, which I did, and I had a marvelous time. And then James came there, and I got married in Chicago, and we came home. I went all through the World's Fair. That was the year of the World's Fair. And I had a marvelous time.
Big city.
Yeah, and they saw that I got entertained, you know, and I thought I should work, but they said, no, you worked all your so far, so just,
Enjoy.
and I did. And I came back home then, and we had to live with Gallagher's because they had no income. I thought I was going to stay in Chicago, but I was sadly disappointed. And I stayed at Gallagher's, and that worked out all right. And
The fishing, the lumber.
Now, was James a fisherman at any time in his life?
was he what?
A fisherman?
No, he never, but he owned a boat in Cornstalk.
Alex.
Alec Cornstalk ran the boat for him, and then he got taxed the stuff, you know, the profit. But no, James,
After that.
he bought, what was that?
Booth.
Booth's Fisheries. He bought Booth. He was on the dock, on that dock, see. He owned his own dock, I mean.
Right.
And then,
Shipped the fish to Chicago.
he what?
Shipped the fish to Chicago.
Oh yeah, every morning he crawled and got the, what do you call it, the
Cranks.
price. So he'd pay the fishermen every night and every evening, because he'd know the right price on the fish. And
2,000 pounds a day.
then he bought a ice maker, you know. He had a good setup. And his dad worked with him. And sometimes that dock would be filled with boats, and he let them pay whatever they wanted to him. He didn't have a set price.
$1 a day.
I don't know what it was,
And what the gas.
and then
paid.
he had gas down there too. I used to go down. I was only a little slip of a girl, a little smaller than I am now, and I'd say to the men on the boats, you know, if they wanted to gas up, have you got any fire in there, and so on and so forth, and because you can't have any fire in there with loaded gas. And I helped them in that way sometimes.
We put up ice and delivered ice around to all the
Yeah.
places.
And then Brian got into the ice business, helping his dad. Well, then what happened?
They delivered it to the houses.
Oh, yes. Everybody had little ice boxes.
The harbor
And-
was pretty busy in those days.
And he had our house built up there in the corner of Forest. It used to be Forest. And
Forest Avenue and Pine Street.
Pine Street. And they changed it since then. But what else went on then?
It was the first day of the electric thing.
He put in electric a 32-volt electric clean the house. I had a washing machine and all that.
That must have been pretty unusual for the times as well.
It was the only private house on the island that had lights, and then they only envied us. You know how it is. And priests and rites, they were money people came from someplace and built those two houses, you know, like Joyce and Skips. And they had lights. And well, then of course when the thing went in the Royal power plant went in, we went to the other. I remember James was shipping the 32-volt washing machine across, selling it somewhere in Charlotte. And there wasn't any, you'd think it was brand new. Of course, we didn't have it too long, maybe. I had a mixer and everything. But anyway, what else did I do?
Where did you have, where were some of the house parties or the dances that went on in town at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Above the store, the old store.
Uh-huh.
Up above Dick's store. Stairs there.
In the early days, it was up above Cuddles. There was a dance hall up there.
Do you remember some of the fish tugs that operated out of the harbor in those days?
I could play the tape. I have all of them. They all went out different,
times.
and the men would know the engines, you know, when they'd hear them going out and so on.
Know them by the sound of the engine.
Mm-hmm. You'll have to come back sometime and I'll play the tape and can take it on. Because I was surprised when I went playing my tapes of some of the stuff I have in them.
Do you remember Father Edward Jewell? Was he?
Oh, yes.
What do you remember of him? I heard that he helped with many deliveries on the island.
Yes, he did.
And
See, he was a minister first. And his first church was down here at the congregation, I think. And he had a son that was in the, he came to the island with his wife. He was all dressed up in some kind of uniform. And he had two daughters. One was in the convent, Matilda, and the other was Ellen, wasn't it, or Helen or something. And she never got married. And he used to doctor everybody. And one time, I imagine he's a saint, if there's, one time this Father Jewell went to Mr. Protar and got some medicine, and he had to take it away up Greentown. So he went across it was snowing a lot. It had snowed. And then he cut across there and went to Shang's place. That was up Greentown. And he went down, he'd go down past his knees, and then he'd crawl on the snow. Mama could see him from our upstairs window, the way he was getting there, because that woman was sick. Mrs. Green, that'd be Red Green. See, then across the road, that'd be Mrs. White Green. the white green is Little F's,
Relatives.
and the red green was the Shang's mother or something. But, and Mama and him delivered many babies. And some of them were, you know, difficult, but no doctor. And Protar would never deliver a baby.
He never did, huh?
No, he never did. We think there was something happened in his life that, because he'd do everything else, you know.
Did he ever make a visit to your house?
Oh yes. And he'd visit to visit.
Yeah.
And when we'd see him coming down, he'd walk, you know. When we'd see him coming down, us kids, we'd tell Mama, and then she'd sit down and start knitting or something. So, because if she was busy, he wouldn't stay. And, he told some horrid stories about his young life, you know. But that's another thing.
Do you remember any of those stories?
Because when you're impressionable at that age, you know.
What were some of the things he told you about?
Well, how hard they had it in Russia. Like tortured. And they must have had money. He said, my mother never wore a house dress. She always was dressed. And he left home, and well, he went to college in Germany.
I see.
He and another man, another doctor, what is it?
Is it Bernardi?
Bernardi. And he came later and visited Protar, you know. He'd come, I guess, every year. But, so then Protar got some kind of a little pension, and he'd send that to his aunts or somebody, you know, some of it. But he sure was a saint of a person. Protar, I mean.
Did he speak with much of an accent, or did he know English really
No,
well?
he knew English. He was well educated. He was in the movies for a while.
Really?
At one time. And Jack used to be up there a lot. He was fascinated with the guns he had on the wall, you know, young boy. And he'd see some of the things that he wore in the movies.
It was in New York, wasn't it?
I think so. And then he went to Wisconsin. And eventually he came to be around.
What kind of things did he use as medicine when he treated people?
Well, the cough medicine was real solid. See, that we think is so you drink water, drink a lot. And that's what they tell you to do. He was right on so many things that they're just finding out now.
But he was self-taught, really, with
No, he went to college.
But as far as medicine goes, he taught himself some of that, didn't he?
Maybe he did, I don't know.
And he had a neighbor that had a house fire, I read, and he gave his own building materials to this
Oh,
neighbor.
yes. Now, that's something that should have been saved, but of course, I haven't any say, so I don't. But he gave all his material to the McCafferty woman. That'd be Francie McCafferty, and that would be these McCafferty's father.
Okay.
And they had a two-story house, and the mother, the grandmother, lived in the lower one, and she had an orphan. And this is why he gave it to them, because this woman lost her husband, and she was kind of old, and she had a daughter and a son, Glenn McCafferty and Beatrice McCafferty. And he gave his, so he just kept the small house that he always lived in.
It was just down the road. Tell where that was. Down the road at the corner there. Keep talking.
Well,
That
he-
house would have been at the corner of Donald Moore's Lane and Sloptown, near Protars?
No, not there. It was down, and now you know a fellow from Charlotte, I bought that. Oh, Haggerty.
Haggard.
And,
Where Pizza Sweets used to be.
uh-huh.
So your mother helped with some of these childbirths as well then, with Father Jewel, you said?
She delivered, I think all but 2 of the greens.
Is that right?
And this is a funny little thing. When Lil was born, I shouldn't mention names. So, you'll screw that up. But anyway, she had one of them, Mary, that had been Mary Green's daughter, or sister-in-law's, was there with her also. So Mama do the nursing and she'd do the kitchen work. So Mama's changing Lil, and she saw she was bleeding from the, well anyway, and so the husband was out in the field doing hay or something. So she went to this, what was her name, Lil, not, but Helen was her name, the daughter, sister-in-law. And she said, start singing. And the woman, of course, thought she was crazy. Well, anyway, she said, I don't want Mary, she's in bed yet, you know, the way they used to be in bed all the time. And I don't want her to get thinking that there's something wrong. You sing for a while, and I'll go out in the field and get the husband to go down after the doctor. The doctor was here then. And so that's what they did. So the doctor came up and fixed Lil. She'd have bled to death. And that's something.
Yeah.
The things they put up with.
Some of the children that your mother and Father Jewel helped deliver were named Jewel in his honor, isn't that right?
They were rough.
They were named Jewel. Some of those kids were given middle names. Well, Jewel Gillespie would have been.
Oh yeah,
one
she
of
was
them.
there.
And there were a few other Islanders who have the name Jewel in their name.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It was quite a time to be on the island, really.
Must have been a lot of work just to get by on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. I cooked there at the rectory. And one day I made, I think it was, what's those things you make with the egg, you know?
Cream puffs.
Cream puffs. And I had a whole thing of them. And I had them on a tin, regular tin for it. And Father came out, and I was just taking them out of the oven. They were baked. And I whirled around, just going to put them down. Father didn't have anything to do with it. And they all slid out on the floor. He started picking them up and put them back in the pan. He said, they're all right. The floor is clean. But
Who were some of the other nuns that were your teachers in your school years?
oh, Sister Robert, sister,
Veritas.
who?
Veritas.
I don't remember that. I used to know all that. But I forget.
And some of your classmates were,
Johnny McDonough. And I think then just the three of us, Lillian and me, and Lizzie Tite Gallagher. She was my best friend because we'd be walking sometimes to school together. She lived up on the Greentown Road and I was on the Slaptown. And we got to be good friends. And in fact, when she went to Chicago, she got married. She married an Irishman, and she had a daughter. And I don't know if he died or... Yeah, no, he didn't die, because then she married a Italian or something. And when she got married the second time, see, no divorce, she shouldn't do it, you know, with Catholic religion. She said, I wonder what Teresa'd say. Somebody heard her say that. She thought enough of me to respect me, you know. But she just died last year or 2 years ago. And she was a millionaire, I guess, when she died.
who were some of the Native American families, the Indian families that you knew when you were growing up there?
Oh, Angeline. She was a kind of a boss or headman. There's two women here that are her offsprings, you know. Lewis, Mrs. Lewis, and her mother. I don't know if she's, because I didn't get the paper last year, so maybe she passed away and I didn't see it. But she had two boys, Simon and Julius. And Jack, my brother Jack, used to, he worked at something and he'd hire those boys, and he said they were such good workers. But when I was a kid, I was afraid of the Indians. People would scare you with them and everything. And they'd walk from the airport downtown, and they walk a distance between them. That was Indian way. Did you ever hear that?
Why would they do that?
I don't know why they ever did. I should have asked. And
The women always walked behind them.
but she was a head guy, though.
Yeah.
Some kind of a chief, or not chief, but, and she'd stop in home, see, on her way. Then Mom would, you know, give her lunch and all that stuff. And the boys. And did you ever know there was beggars on the road, on the island?
No, I didn't.
Sam and I think it was Joe. And one of them was ambitious and the other wouldn't work. And so the people would just give to the ambitious guy, you know. I know Mom would give them sandwiches and that kind of stuff. You know. I don't know if they gave them money, but food.
And who were they? What?
I don't know who their ancestors were.
Well, the bluff on the west side is named after Angeline, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. They had a house up there, and she raised her children up there.
And was there a smaller village at the bottom of the bluff? Indian?
I don't know. I often wondered about that. I'd hear people talking.
When you were younger, did you get to the other islands very much? Did you travel?
We went to High Island one time. And I was on Garden Island. See, Garden Island used to have a nice church.
Yes.
And High Island had Lucille Gillespie taught over there, and that she had an elegant place over there. And it all tumbled down or something. And the Israelites were there, and Indians.
Do you remember the Israelites very well?
The what?
Do you remember the Israelites? Do you remember?
Oh, sure, sure. And they'd come in to the stores, and they'd sit alongside of the
Stove.
Dick's porch there, you know. And they had little boats, and then sometimes they'd take and ship stuff to, what's that place the Israelites have over?
Benton Harbor?
Benton Harbor. They raised luscious food, you know, the fruit.
Yeah, I've heard that. And they sold that on the island as well, right?
Mm-hmm. And when the Israelites would die, they'd keep them till night, and they'd bury them at night, because they didn't want Lucille or anybody to know that they died. They weren't supposed to die, you know. That was their religion.
So Lucille was teaching at that school
Mhm.
when you were. Did you ever visit her when she was teaching there, or visit High Island while she was teaching?
Mm-hmm. I nearly starved. Somehow we missed a meal or something. But she came over to the island one time, and I think she had appendicitis. Lucille did. Dr. Palmer operated her on her in her mother's place.
Right on the kitchen table.
Mm-hmm. I used to tell the doctors that it wasn't that particular one, but Lewis, Jerry Lewis, they put him on the table, and they always said the doctor, he took part of a rib or something out of it and threw it on the floor, and of course some animal came. Oh dear.
A lot of people traveled over the ice in those days. Did you ever have a chance to do that yourself?
No, my sister did though. My dad was sick, and when Bert and Mary heard that, they came on the ice, and Uncle Willie was with them. And but those people were so knowledgeable about the ice, like Uncle Willie and, you know, the older people. The night I was born, I should have taken a drink of something to get my mouth, my,
Do you want a drink?
no. But anyway, the two boys, young boys, younger than you, started to cross the ice. So everybody was, you know, there maybe 12 or 14. Everybody is worried about them. So they kept ringing the church bell. And So Mama, when she'd hear the church bell, she knew the boys weren't found, and it would scare the wits out of her. But they did show up anyway, because they lived to be old.
Thanks to the church bell.
Yeah, they went out looking for them. But after we graduated, James went to Chicago to make his fortune. And he got me a friendship ring, a 32nd of a diamond. And but anyway, he went across and he put something under the car to extend it. See it went down. But he drove that winter. You could drive to Harbor Springs or wherever. And then he had a new car. Go to Chicago. But it's kind of funny, you know. I say it's faith, but when they you can't go over now, you know, every year, but you could in the olden days. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
It was kind of a protection from the
Big snowbanks.
well. Mary had a fur coat, so she was warm enough and everything, but it was a perilous trip.
You were pretty good friends with Grace Gillespie, and
I went to see her every time I went to the island. And
What you did when you were children.
Huh?
What you did when you were young.
oh yes, we were pals then too. When they'd take me downtown, some of them would fight to sit next to me at the table. My dad would always have a roast or something to take down. You know, we had our own meat. And I always ate breakfast. And I'd get up early with my dad, and he'd go out in the outside kitchen and take off some meat out of whatever was hanging up there, you know, for the winter. And he and I would eat breakfast. Mary never did that. I said, if somebody asked me why I lived so old, I'd say it was because I always ate breakfast. And after I moved in here, and a lot of people came in here and stayed. And they'd come in and I'd want to give them breakfast. No, I never eat in the morning. Haven't you heard that? I don't think that's right.
Just don't get something to eat in the morning.
yeah. Was there a more superstition and things like that among your parents' generation, or than
I
later
don't think so.
generations? No.
They were happy people. And now Christmas, we'd be home, and somebody'd always come and sing. My dad liked a lot of singing. And of course they'd have a bottle. I know Andrew Green, that'd be Johnny Green's son, he'd come. And he could sing, and my dad would have a good time. And of course Mama just would cook, you know, feed them or something. And I'm just around listening.
They must have told a lot of stories.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of things would they talk about?
Oh, in the saloon days. Different people, you know, and different men, and how they'd act. And my dad said one time, he said, for 3 or 4 years I tried to lick a marten. And it seems he couldn't. The martens were big men. But he tried, and he I suppose then they'd be drinking. When our little baby died, Mama said, your dad could go down to the saloon and drown his grief, and she couldn't, or she wouldn't take a drink.
Was there a saloon